Alright guys, we are back in my garage for another video, and today we're going to be installing wheel spacers on my 340i. Now in this video I'm going to show you guys how you can take your own measurements on your car in order to figure out what wheel spacers you want to go with so that you can get the fitment that you need, and these spacers are a great opportunity just to make the car look better without sacrificing on handling or drivability and reliability. So from the factory, our cars have really modest setups and the wheels are kind of sunk in just to make sure there are no clearance issues or anything, but these spacers will push the wheels out so that you have much better fitment and it just looks a lot more aggressive. Now the wheel spacers I got are from Motorsport Hardware and they are a sponsor for the channel, so I've got their wheel stud kit and now I'm adding on their spacers as well. If you guys are interested in getting anything from them, there will be a link down in the description, and feel free to ask me if you have any questions on which setup you should go with for your specific build. But we'll go ahead and go over to my car. I'll show you guys some of the details on how this works, and hopefully you guys find this video useful. Now, as always, for everybody that's new to the channel, I create these videos to help keep you updated on the latest developments in our community, as well as discuss technical topics so that we have a better understanding of how our engines work. So if you're interested in more videos like that, be sure to subscribe because there will be a lot more coming out in the future. Now you know how things work with me. We're going to cover a couple of the technical details on fitting your car with wheel spacers before we actually install them, and then I'll show you guys how they install. Obviously that process is really simple. But like I said, wheel spacers are going to fit between your brakes and your wheels to push the wheels out and make them fit a little bit better. And so you're going to be able to take some simple measurements on your car in order to figure out what size wheel spacers you want to go with. Now there are a couple things that you need to keep in mind in order to make this whole process work. First is, of course, you need to know the dimensions of your stock wheels and tires. So whatever wheels and tires you have on the car, if you don't know the specs, figure what those are, because you're going to be measuring in reference to your wheels and tires. So you need that as kind of a starting point, and then you can figure out, the space and clearance that you have around it. If you have stock wheels, on my 340i, I have the 18s, so it's a staggered setup, 18 by 8 ET34 in the front and 18 by 8.5 ET47 in the rear. If you have the OEM 19-inch or 20-inch wheels, it's almost the same, except in the front it's ET36 instead of 34. So BMW gave you guys about 2 millimeters of extra fender clearance. But other than that, everything else is the same as far as like the width and the offsets. So it makes it really easy to go through threads on forums like Bimmercode, or you can go to our Facebook group, B58 Discussion, and check out what kinds of setups other people are running to give you an idea of how it will fit. Now, the other thing I highly recommend is lowering your car first. If you plan on lowering your car, just know that it's going to change your alignment pretty significantly, which will affect your wheel fitment. So you can actually get a wheel set up and put it on your car and it'll fit perfectly on the stock suspension. But as soon as you lower it, the wheels are going to camber in and it's going to fit differently, and then you're going to have gaps where you don't want them to be. So I know a lot of people don't like the idea of lowering their car on stock wheels, and people always want to ditch their stock wheels, but I highly recommend lowering it first. That way when you get these measurements at your final ride height, you can make sure that you're getting wheels that will fit it perfectly, and once you get everything installed, it'll just be a lot more beautiful. You don't want to be one of the guys that have to add camber plates and add additional spacers and all of these things just to try to make their wheels fit. So lower your car first, take the measurements, then pick out your spacers or your aftermarket wheel setup. And then finally, just helping you avoid rubbing issues, you want to understand your suspension geometry. So our front suspension, because it's a McPherson strut, you're not going to have the same clearance that you do in the rear where we have multi-link and multiple control arms. So in the front, you need to be a little bit more conservative and just give it a little bit of space, because especially if you lower your car a lot, you're going to run into rubbing issues if you are too aggressive. There's a certain point where the wheels can compress and you actually go into positive camber, so it pushes the top of the wheel out, and obviously you can imagine that's going to make it even easier for it to hit the fender. So just keep that in mind, especially if you don't want to run camber plates or anything like that. The fronts, you're not going to be as aggressive as you are in the rear. Now in the rear, you can pretty much get it right up on the fender because you have that multi-link suspension. As the wheels compress, it's going to camber in and just suck it up into the fender well. So that makes it a lot easier in the rear to be really aggressive and get a really nice look. But yeah, in the front, just keep in mind, you probably want to take a couple millimeters off from your measurements to make sure that you don't have any rubbing or clearance issues. So we're gonna go ahead and go over to the car, and the way that you take these measurements are really simple. What I like to use is a square, just because I can easily put that on the face of the wheel and measure the gap to the fender at a 90-degree angle. Your spacer is going to push it out at a 90-degree angle, so that's the most accurate way to measure it. If you just use a tape measure or something like that, then sometimes you can measure it at an angle and it won't really be accurate. So that's why I like using a square that is, at a perfect 90-degree shape. Another thing some people like to do is just use a long piece of cardboard. Just make sure it can cover up the face of the wheel, usually about 2 feet long. So if you've got a long piece of cardboard that you can use with a square edge, then you can put that on the face of the wheel and kind of mark where the location is that it's touching the fender. Now, once you've got your square up against the wheel, look at the inner lip of the fender, not the outside, to see how much space you have. Because I have a lot of camber in the front, I have a lot of space. I've got just over an inch. So that's not really typical. I've got 3 degrees of front camber. Most people are closer to 1 degree or so. And so that's why I have so much space. And that's another reason why I really want to put these wheel spacers on the car. But again, look at the amount of distance that you have there, convert it to millimeters so that you can figure out how much of a wheel spacer you can run, and then maybe just back it off 3 to 5 millimeters to make sure that you don't have any clearance issues. Also, if you want to measure the gap from the wheel to the strut, you can do that at this point as well. Just stick a tape measure basically to measure the gap from the strut to your wheels. And just keep in mind that the location where your wheels could hit or where your clearance needs to be will vary depending on your wheel entire height. So it's a good idea to look at it from the side and see if it's going to hit the spring or if it's going to go underneath the spring and maybe touch the shock. That'll give you a better idea of what you can measure to figure out how much clearance you actually have. And then kind of measuring the gap to the fender and the gap to the strut gives you an idea of the maximum amount of width of a tire that you could fit underneath there. And as I'm going through this, hopefully you guys understand that this isn't just a way to measure your car for wheel spacers, but also for aftermarket wheels and tires. By measuring the overall clearance, you have a better idea of how wide of a wheel and tire setup you can run on a specific axle. So in this case, measuring the distance to the strut and the distance to the fender, plus the actual width of the wheel, will give you an idea of how much space you have to go with. The widest I think I've seen in the front of our cars is a 265, but keep in mind that that's probably going to poke a little bit if you don't get your offset perfect. And if you have a little bit of camber, it also helps with like clearance issues and things like that. That's just a really aggressive setup. So most people end up running either a 245 or 255 width tire on an 8.5 to 9 inch wheel. Now on the rear, you're going to take the exact same measurement. So again, I put my square up to the wheel and measured the gap to the fender. Here it was just over 1/2 inch. And so that works perfectly for me. I basically could run about a 12 to 13 millimeter spacer in the rear and get it pretty much perfectly flush. Now, again, you can get more aggressive in the rear. Some people run as wide as a 15 millimeter spacer. And because of our suspension geometry and the way that the wheels kind of suck into the quarter panel as the wheels compress, it works fine. But just keep in mind that while the car is sitting static, it might have a little bit of poke. So if you want to have that really aggressive look, you can go as wide as 15 millimeters, but I'm going to be a little more conservative and stick with a 12 millimeter setup. Also, I should mention that because I have wheel studs, there is a max limit to the size of a spacer that I can run. If you run a spacer that's too wide, then when you put your nuts onto the wheel studs, you're not going to get enough threads of engagement to securely, hold the wheel onto your car. So the maximum that I can run is a 20 millimeter spacer. So in the rear, I'm going to go ahead with that 12 millimeter spacer, basically matching up to where my measurement was. And then in the front, I'm going to go with a 15 millimeter spacer. I don't want to go right to 20 millimeters and right to the limits of what the studs can handle, especially because I, drive my car aggressively and stuff like that. So I think a 15 millimeter spacer is a good balance of keeping me safe without pushing things to the limit, while, filling up some of that gap that I created by adding the extra camber to my car. So installation of your spacers is super simple. What you're going to do is basically jack up the car and then go ahead and remove your front wheels. Just remove all 5 of the bolts. And you can see right on the hub, basically it's a copy of what you're going to see on your spacer. The spacer is hub centric, so your wheels are going to locate onto it and prevent you from having any wheel balance or wobble issues and things like that. That's that kind of lifted lip that you see in the middle. So slide your spacers onto there and make sure the holes line up if you're using bolts, or just slide the holes over the wheel studs if you have studs like me. and then you put your wheels back on and tighten everything down. And it's really that simple. The spacer, again, just is sandwiched between the wheels and your brakes to eat up the extra gap between your wheel and your fender. And the rear is going to be the exact same. Again, just jack up the car, remove the wheel, install your wheel spacers, and then put the wheels back on. So it's really that simple, guys. You know, here's a little bit of a before and after. You can see that the wheels were very sunken at 3 degrees of camber, and so it was in dire need of a wheel spacer setup. And then on the other side, after I've installed the spacers, it's not perfectly flush, but it's in a good position where I won't have any rubbing issues, and it does look a lot better than before. Now in the rear, I think it looks almost perfect. The 12mm spacers ate up all of the gap, and the tire is kind of showing on the side a little bit, which is a look that I like because now it just looks more aggressive. If you look at it from the rear, it makes the whole car look wider. So I'm a big fan of the current fitment with these aftermarket wheel spacers. So again, you know, if you guys are interested in getting wheel spacers, I'll have links down in the description where you can find the spacers that I bought, as well as the studs and all the other options to improve your wheel fitment and just, you know, make it easier to take your wheels on and off of your car. And also on another note, I am partnered with Apex Wheels. So if you guys are looking for aftermarket wheels for your build, definitely message me and I can help you pick out the right sizes for your car, depending on your goals and your priorities for your specific build. But yeah, I think that's pretty much it for this video. So thank you guys for watching, and I hope this helps. And if you have any other questions or comments, leave them down below.